At this time, I'd like to introduce Lieutenant General Dan Hokanson, the 11th Vice Chief of the National Guard Bureau. General Hokanson, just to give you perspective on his position, he's one of 4 National Guard general officers that must remain in the National Capital Region at all times. The Chief of the National Guard Bureau, the Vice Chief, or one of the directors of our service components, just in case anything happens, he has to be there. And one of the reasons he has to leave our conference is to get back to cover on the NCR, and we really appreciate him being here. Also, to put in perspective how important he has a red phone in his office. I thought I was important when I got a bathroom in my office. You're not important until you get the red phone in your office. So really, just to tell you that just bring it all into perspective. Previously, he served as the Deputy Commander of U.S. NORTHCOM, and I won't read all of his assignments. When I asked the team to print out his bio, it was like 4 pages long. So I went through and picked out the highlights. Graduate of the United States Military Academy, served in the Air Cavalry, Attack Aviation, and as a test pilot on active duty before coming to the Oregon National Guard. For the aide-de-camps out there, I know there's a couple of them here. He started out as an aide-de-camp, and look where he is. So you all, there's hope for you, serving, paying your dues as an aide. But worked his way up to eventually become the Adjutant General for the state of Oregon. Let me tell you just briefly about the man that I know. Whenever you mention his name, often you hear the words genuine. You hear the word sincere, an officer, a professional. But more importantly, as we progress through the ranks, we have to find that life-work balance. And I will tell you from firsthand knowledge that General Hokanson has found that balance between reaching the highest levels of his career, but also being a devoted family man. Last year, he was supposed to come speak at our conference, and he realized he had a family engagement, and he called and said, listen, I have a family engagement. And obviously he did the right thing. But he said he circled back, and he's here this year, a man true to his word, and we really appreciate that, sir. As general officers, there's not too much we can comment on. And one of the reasons that you all know me, I'm a Falcons fan, and I like football, and General Hokanson is a devout college football fan, but he's also a Patriots fan. And I will let you know, he talks trash. He talks a lot of trash. In fact, he beat me about the head and shoulders 2 Februarys ago. But that's just the kind of person he is. He's a professional, but he's also personable. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you the 11th Vice Chief of the National Guard Bureau, Lieutenant General Dan Hokanson.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Okay, we good? All right, can everybody hear me okay in the back? I actually prefer to walk to stand behind a mic, so I hope you don't mind. So one of the great things about Georgia is it's a lot like Oregon. It's really green. One thing I discovered this morning, though, is the bears in Georgia are much faster than the bears in Oregon. Because I like to run on trails, and in Oregon I run and I never see them. Or they're so slow that I do see them and they get out of the way. But gosh, this morning I was running on this trail, and I swear this bear reached out and grabbed my foot and just made me fall on the trail. When I turned around, he was gone. And because I never trip, so you guys have really fast bears is all I can say. First of all, I want to thank the association for the chance to come out here. I really appreciate the opportunity anytime I can, not to just get out of the Pentagon, but to see the great soldiers and airmen of the National Guard and get to spend some time with you. What I wanted to do this morning is just really quickly kind of just show you some of the things that I see every day, and then kind of do a quick walk down from the National Defense Strategy to how that impacts us and all of our soldiers and airmen that show up on drill on any weekend. So next slide, please. So just real quick, every morning, General Engel and I and the whole staff up at the National Guard Bureau, we get a chance to see this slide, and it's a reminder every single day of what our guardsmen are doing. And so it's really a map of the United States. It shows where we're involved on that day, and some of these continue over time. But then also you'll see on the right side the fact that we've got 26,500 soldiers and airmen deployed in support of combatant commanders today, and we've got a total of 38,000 across the country. And when you look at the floods right now in the Midwest, and then also some of the forest fires that are starting to kick up on the West. So we get a picture every single day, and this is a reminder of why we're in that building. Because we're there to represent the non-federalized soldiers and airmen every single day and advocate for all the great work that you're doing every day. Okay? So that's my one slide. And all my notes have to fit on a 3x5 card. So that's my goal. All right, so let me just talk about a couple of things that are going on. For those, most of you have probably heard that there's a new national defense strategy. And one of the great things about this national defense strategy is when it was written, when then Secretary Mattis came in, we were actually authorized to put one of our National Guard colonels on that staff. And it's a gentleman, actually an Oregon Guardsman by the name of Juice Pyrak, phenomenal Air Guard officer. He spent about 3 months working on that team, helping massage the language, and he also gave the chief regular updates and the opportunity to basically comment on what language went into the national defense strategy. So it was a strategy that included all components, not just the Guard, but also the Reserve. And so that was another great opportunity for us. But what this did, if you haven't read this strategy, I would highly recommend you find a copy. There's an unclassified and a classified version. But what it does is it kind of shows how things have changed recently around the globe. And so previously we've been, over the last 18 years, we've really been focused on Afghanistan and Iraq, counterinsurgency fight, trying to stabilize those regions. Now we've gone back, really kind of back to the future, some folks would say, to really focus on our near-peer competitors, really the greatest threats to the United States, which are China and Russia. Now they call it, sometimes it was called for a while the 2+3, that's China and Russia, and then the +3 was North Korea, Iran, and then also terrorism or counterterrorism operations around the globe. So when you look at that, that is a significant change. And the change that it causes to us is, over the past 18 years, we've had, for the most part, a pretty good notice and predictability. Hey, the 48th Brigade is going to deploy this year. And so we had the train up, we got ready, got everything ready, and the 48th is deployed now. Same thing when I was a commander of the 41st IBCT. We were in Afghanistan when we got notified we're going to go to Iraq in about 2 years. But that predictability allowed us to come back, reset, train, and go. When you look at a near-peer competitor, such as China and Russia, those indications of warning and that predictability may not be there. And so what we have to go back to is the ability to do large, full-scale, no-notice mobilizations. And if you go prior to 2001, or prior to 9/11, we used to have MOB books. We used to have strip maps to everybody's house. We knew where we were going to go and what we were going to do. And those are the things we're going to really need to have to get back to. And so associated with that on the Army side, you're going to see where we've gone to 4 combat training center rotations a year, because we have to get back to the large-scale brigade and battalion maneuver level warfare, because that's the type of threat that we're looking at facing in the next generations, actually decades. And you'll see that term 2028, particularly on the Army side. And the reason why that date is significant, it's based on China and Russia and the capabilities that we determined that they'll have there. And so a lot of the modernization is focused on that. On the air, you're seeing a continual focus, and also the change from a permissive environment to actually going into a non-permissive environment where there's a high threat of, we call it the A2C2, basically the counter-air threat, because we've really enjoyed air superiority over Iraq and Afghanistan and even Syria. But now you're looking at a potential competitor where that capability to come in, you've got an A280 umbrella that is going to have to be taken down at significant cost in order to dominate the skies over those areas. So those are a couple of things that change. Now, what does that mean to us? So this Chief of Staff of the Army has said, when you look at the brigade combat teams, he'd like 66%, 2/3 of the active duty to be ready to go at any one time. And now he said his goal for the National Guard is 33%. And so when you look at the fact we've got 27 brigade combat teams, that's 9 of them, that's 1/3. And if you look at 4 CTC rotations a year, theoretically we could get pretty close, having 4 that just finished last year, 4 going that year, and then we've got to have 1 to build that. So we're working very closely with the Army on how we do that. So that's the higher level aspect. What I really want to do is share with you today how that impacts each and every one of us. So the importance of individual requirements, I cannot stress enough. Okay, the fact that our soldiers and airmen show up on drill every single weekend that they're required to throughout the year is not something that is overlooked by our near-peer competitors, China and Russia. They are very aware of our National Guard, our capabilities, and the fact that we do drill more than 1 weekend a month and sometimes a lot more than 2 weeks out of the year. They see that as a very viable and strong part of the active duty and the entire United States military. So the fact that we take our PT tests, the fact that we meet on our drills and make up for those that we can't, meet our training requirements, and make sure our medical, dental, all those other things so we're fully deployable, that stuff is important well beyond what it may see at your local armory. That has an impact at the national level, and it has an impact internationally on how our near competitors look at us, because they're aware of all that data that we generate. And so the more that we can do individually to be ready makes our entire formation ready. Okay, so now that's the individual requirements. On the air side, we're very fortunate that we've got about 30% full-time manning. And for most cases, for the Air Guard units, they come to an air base where most of the wing is together. And so they're required to meet almost to the T the same readiness requirements as their active duty counterparts, and they're funded at that level. On the Army side, it's a little bit more complicated because our brigade combat teams, in fact, when I was the commander of the 41st in Oregon, in some cases we had company units in a battalion that were 8 hours away from their battalion headquarters. And so it's a little bit harder to get together on a drill weekend, but what we stress is that we have to train to the level that we're resourced at. So if you're resourced at platoon level or company level, we need to do everything we can to be proficient and meet our readiness levels for what we're funded at. Now, hopefully, we would have indications of warning to accelerate that as we need to be. But it's rely upon every single one of our leaders at every level to make sure that we train and we're prepared to be ready at the level that we're resourced at. Now, resourcing is another conversation, and Roy talked about that. That's one of those things that we're really trying to stress and really tell the Army and the Air Force that story. We can be 100% ready, but then you require 100% of the cost to do that. And so it's finding how we maintain our National Guard business model as not really as a part-time force, but a ready force that is ready at the level that we're resourced at. Now, one of the things that General Engel and the Army Guard's been trying to do all along is increase the amount of full-time manning on the Army side. And fortunately, earlier this week, I was at a sustainment panel, and that question came up to me. He says, what have we learned for the Air Guard that we could actually leverage on the Army Guard side? And I basically laid out the difference. You know, when you got 30% full-time manning and the wing meets at a central location, that's why they can meet those active duty readiness requirements. But when you look at the Army Guard, we're managed at about 16% full-time manning, and your units are dispersed, it's a different model. Now, what we don't want to do is, we don't want to become the active duty and have everybody on full-time orders, because then that's not our business model. That's not the value that we provide our nation. And so we're trying to find that right area where we've got enough full-time manning to meet the requirements of readiness that we're being directed to provide, but then also maintain that business model so we don't become too expensive to where then there's a question of, what's the value that we're getting. Okay. So we talked about national defense strategy, how it's changed, how we individually and how we train to do that. The other thing I would say is, if you look across the room, one of the most important things and the greatest value I think that we bring is we've got a lot of mature leaders with different perspectives, but they've also met their training requirements and their education requirements on the military side and the civilian side. And you need to be obviously trained in your mission set, knowledgeable in what you're supposed to do, what you'll likely be asked to do, and knowledgeable about your unit to see what they can and can't accomplish and what you've trained them to accomplish. But the other thing, really the unknown, or actually the thing that is really hard to put a price tag or a way to measure, is the adaptability. If you look at where we were on 9/11 and technology, AI, computer, cyber, all those things that are impacting the battlefield now, we need adaptable leaders that can understand that and be decisive and make decisions for the best of their organization. If you haven't seen it yet, AUSA about a year and a half ago put out a short paper on the battalion tactical groups that the Russians employed in the Donbas region of Ukraine. If you get a chance, please read that, because they got really smart, because they didn't do too well against the Ukrainians up front, and then they created these battalion task groups, and they put air defense at the battalion level, and I'm not trying to get into too much detail, but they had electronic warfare, they had cyber at the battalion level, and it had a huge impact on the battlefield. And we need to be prepared for those type of environments. And on the Army side, you're going to see that at the Combat Training Center rotations at JRTC and NTC. And on the air side, I think it's red flag and green flag. I've been down to red flag once. It's pretty impressive, the training level that they get to there, so that our leaders understand the environment they're going into so that they can be successful. All right. So the other thing I would mention along all those lines as well, and Georgia is doing an admirable job at this, and that's recruiting and retaining our soldiers and airmen to fill our formations. I've heard arguments as a brigade commander, if we make the training harder, people are going to want to stick around. And in some organizations that works, and some it doesn't. And I would ask you, because Georgia's done a great job, is to share that with the states around you, your ability to recruit and retain and fill your formations. Because what we can't do overnight is we can't take somebody off the street, send them through basic, and get them in a formation in less than 2 weeks or 30 days. But by continually recruiting and maintaining 100% strength, you've got those folks either already identified through the training pipeline or actually in your unit. And that is one of the most critical things that we look at when we look at organizations across the board. If they're green in personnel, we can send them somewhere to get trained and ready to go. But if you're red in personnel, then now we got to find those people to fill those formations. And so it causes increased planning time and also delays in getting our formations where we need them to go. So my hat's off to what you do every single day, because not all of our states are green. We're doing much better now. And for those that wonder why some of the states hit the red, there's a lot of reasons to that. But part of it is when we went through sequestration, the Army Guard, we were at about, I think, 354 at the time. We were scheduled to go down to 335, and some even talked about going down to 315. And the average person that enlists in the Guard enlists for 6 years. So for about a 4-year window, we were planning on just going down and losing almost 30,000 folks. And so when that ramp stopped and they said, oh my gosh, we can't go that low, we need to stick at 343.5, we were already on that downward curve, and those folks that would have been in, that we recruited 4 years ago that would still have 2 years left today, they weren't in the formations. And so now we're catching up, we're getting those filled up, and I think I was briefed yesterday, we're doing pretty well on our recruiting on the Army side. The air is already 100% across the board. Nationwide, so they're doing really well. And on the Army, we still got work to do, but we're getting after it. So when we've got our folks in formations, the other thing we have to do is we have to help them balance that triad. And Reg talked a little bit about this, and I can't tell you enough. We've got our military careers in the Guard, we've got our civilian careers, and we've got our families. And we look to our leaders to help us find that balance. And everyone in our formation is in a different part of their life or a different aspect of their life. And I lived that firsthand. When I first came into the National Guard, I was a young captain, and I was the tags aide. I was doing at the time what we called CAS Cube. I had a new job. I had 3 kids in diapers. And I'll tell you, that was hard. In fact, I actually had to come into the tag at one point and say, sir, I can't keep doing this. just getting run into the ground on all three sides. And to his credit, he was awesome. He said, "What can you do?" I said, "Well, sir, I want to stay in." He goes, "Well, hey, are you busy on Tuesday nights?" I'm like, "No." He goes, "Well, come in and drill on Tuesday nights." And so for about 3 months, I did that. And because he took the time and understood where I was in my life at that time, I was able to get through that hard time at work and with the family and, potty trained the kids, got all through that stuff. But I would ask you, when you look across your formations, if you've got great soldiers or airmen, they're going to have that time in their life. And when you have that flexibility, try and work with them. Because when I got through it and I realized, gosh, my leadership is willing to do that for me, when I became a battalion commander, I tried to do that for some of my soldiers as well, and it had a huge impact because some of those folks stuck around and they're still sticking around. So please, as a leader, use the tools that you have to keep your folks in your formation and also find those right ones that you want to recruit in as well. One thing Roy talked about is, the budget and what we do. And $730 billion is a lot of money. And I think, personally, that the National Guard is one of the best values that our nation has and has ever had. When you look at the capability and the capacity that we provide our nation and at the cost that we do that. But $730 billion is a lot of money. And every single one of us and all of our neighbors and the other 99% of our country that may not serve, they pay into that. And one thing that Secretary Mattis and the Defense Department is continuing to work on under Acting Secretary of Defense Shanahan is to really get that receipt back to Congress. We're going through an audit now, and we did that last year, and I think that's a good thing because we're used to doing a lot with a little, and I think across the entire department, we should be able to tell our nation, you gave us $730 billion, here's what you got for that, and show them, here's the equipment we bought, here's the training we accomplished. But then also along the way, if there's ways that we're not spending our resources correctly, to find that and adjust it and make those corrections so that we provide the greatest value so our country sees if we're going to spend that much money, we're going to get that much and more out of it. And so every one of us at every level across all components, active guard and reserve, that's our responsibility to show our nation what you gave us, we made the best of. Okay. I know I'm coming up on time here. There's just a couple of last things I wanted to talk about. How many folks brought their families here? Okay? All right. I cannot tell you how important that is. Okay? Last year my son got married. I couldn't make it out here. But when I was walking down the hall, I couldn't help but notice they had a place for kids to come in. And when I think back to my early days in the Guard, none of that stuff happened. But it's a different Guard today. We ask a lot more of our folks. I mean, it wasn't that we were asking a lot of them back then, but when you look at what we've done in the Guard over the last 18 years, and I talk about the importance of that triad, I personally think the most important thing is your family. Because when we take off the uniform, they're still going to be there, I hope. And the fact that you bring them, that's awesome, because they got to realize the sacrifices that you make and the things that you do. And for all the leaders, and everybody in this room is clearly a leader, when your soldiers and airmen show up on a drill weekend or if you've got a family event, make sure the families understand just how important they are. And the way that you show them is by telling them how important their service member is. I'll never forget, as a captain on active duty, I was at a picnic, and one of our E5 showed up, young E5 showed up with his wife and his son, and he brought him over to our S3, who I worked for at the time, and want to introduce, our S3 captain to his wife and son, and he brought him up there and he introduced him, and I'll never forget, it was one of those moments I just never forgot. He introduced his wife and his son, and the captain looked at him and said, "Yeah, your dad works for me." And you could just see in a split second the expression on his wife change. I don't know if I was the only one that saw it, but I never forgot that. And so ever since then, and I don't think he had bad intentions, but I think if he would have said, "Hey, your dad is awesome." Because to the parent, or to the spouse and the son, their dad might as well be a general, supreme allied commander, command sergeant major, because they're their hero. And any chance we can to reinforce that with the family, because they're the ones that give up those soccer weekends, birthdays, anniversaries. They need to know that what the sacrifices that their parents are making is actually appreciated. And so ever since then, I mean, it was one of those things I thought was natural, but it isn't for everybody. And when I talk to kids, I always kneel down and get at their level and just tell them how proud we are of their dad or their mom and what they're doing. And you just see a smile on their face because they realize, gosh, my dad's gone on weekends and somebody actually appreciates that they're doing, or my mom's gone and she's not there for my soccer game, that they are appreciated. And actually, personally, that happened to me once. I just came back from Afghanistan and I was getting ready to go to Iraq, and I was walking with my son, who was 8 at the time, and I just picked him up after work. I was still in uniform. And this gentleman, we were walking to the store, he stopped and shook my head and said, "Thanks for your service." And it was one of those things where, like, my son grabbed my hand really hard, and he kind of looked at me and it's like, wow, Dad, people realize that. So it's one of those interesting moments, and you never know where they're going to be, but really take advantage of those and whenever you get them. And for your families, you know, I know you do this on your own already, but please thank them as much as you can. And when you do have that time, spend it with them, spend quality time. And also leverage the benefits of your service. I mean, you saw the scholarships posted earlier. There's educational benefits. There's TRICARE, Reserve Select. I know we're working really hard on that to get it to everybody. But there's a lot of great advantages that your service provides, and your retirement at the end. And making sure that your family's aware of that is one other thing, and leveraging it to their benefit any chance you can is really going to help them and see the value of not only what you're doing for your country, but also the benefit to them. Last thing I've got is I can never tell you enough how thankful I am, you know, to be part of this organization. But mostly, I just want to thank you, because not only would I not have a job, but none of us at the National Guard Bureau would have a job if you didn't sacrifice and find that balance between your family life, your military career, and your civilian career. I mean, I've been an M-Day soldier, and as I said before, it's hard. There's times it is really hard, and you have to kind of balance that and try and keep, you know, all 3 plates in the air sometimes. But the fact you show up on drill weekends, I know many have brought your families here. The sacrifices you make on deployments, both Army and Air, around the globe. You know, we could not be the country we are without all the sacrifices you make. And please don't ever think that we don't notice that. And we hear it from a lot of folks. Hey, thank you for your service and all that you do. But I think each and every one of us understands just exactly what that means. And I do appreciate when folks tell me that, because you know, when you're out in the box or out in the desert or on a drill weekend missing something, sometimes that's a good reminder that people do recognize all the sacrifices that you make. All right. So with that, do we have any time for questions? Okay, all right. I'm willing to take any questions about anything. Oh, and let me finish one quick story, though. So my mother-in-law is from South Boston. So my marriage contract required I become a Patriots, a Red Sox, a Bruins, and a Celtics fan. And I just tell people, I'm so glad she didn't grow up in Cleveland. So, okay. Any question about anything, folks?
Hey, sir, Colonel Gentry,
Yeah.
to the Joint Staff here in Georgia. Just a question for our joint audience a little bit. I know a lot of discussion about joint matters and the requirements now for becoming joint qualified.
Right.
So just any comments you would like to add towards, especially our majors, the lieutenant colonel level, as they're looking at joint opportunities, joint assignments, both up at National Guard Bureau or throughout Department of the Army, Department of the Air Force. Just kind of encouraging those younger officers and any guidance you can provide to them, sir.
Okay, absolutely. So the reason why, there's a couple of things. Okay, so on the active side, you have to be joint qualified to become a flag officer across all services. It's not been imposed on us yet, but I think at some point in the future it will. But gosh, when I was in this room as a captain, I never thought I'd be up here. So I didn't worry about it. But I had some unique opportunities, and I had a tag that would tell us this is what you need to do. And so my counseling session with my tag throughout my career, who is still my mentor even though he's retired, was, "Sir, what do I want to do next?" And he would tell me what I wanted to do next. But the reason I say this, so we're working really hard to get a lot of our joint positions in the state coded as JDAL so they get joint credit. In fact, I think on the last board I heard on this week, we got 50% of them approved. So we really work hard with the states to identify the joint positions that we're already doing in the states, so we get joint credit for that. On a personal note, I would tell you the opportunity to work at a combatant command or in a joint assignment is unbelievable. Because what you can see is those folks that wear other uniforms and talk in different acronyms, they're just like us. They just picked the wrong service. But, you know, but the point is, it's a great opportunity to see different perspectives on how they look at problem sets, and it's a great personal development thing. But the other thing is, if you do any joint exercises, or if you think your position within the state qualifies as joint matters, please document that in your evaluations, because you can apply for that credit later. Actually, you need to apply as soon as you finish. But also, try and learn as much as you can and document that to get that credit. A point here, it all adds up over time. And what you want to do is, we'd really like to get all of our senior 06s and flag officers to be joint qualified. Because that way, when you step into a joint environment, it's not something that you haven't been in before. And you're used to the other acronyms, you're working with the other services, and so it's a huge benefit. I mean, I found this late in my career, and fortunately, folks were smarter than I and wrote my evaluations to document all my joint experience, and so I got credit for some, and some I didn't get credit for. But then I also found I needed to go to, at the time, AJPME 2 as a 1-star, and everybody else in the class was a major, but I needed to get that done to get joint qualified. So, and then the last thing I would tell you is, so every XO that I've had has come directly from a state, former 06 commander. And I cannot tell you the importance of coming from the state and serving at the Army Guard, the Air Guard, at the National Guard Bureau. Because we can't lose touch with our M-Day soldiers and our folks that come from a drill weekend. Okay? It concerns me sometimes when we have folks on the staff that haven't gone to a drill weekend in 8 years. Because you have to understand what our soldiers and airmen go in order to represent them. Now, there's some unique skill sets that require a long time, and I fully get that. But I highly encourage you. I was very fortunate. General Reese, who I was the aide for when I became a major, he said, "You need to go back to the National Guard Bureau for a year and serve," and I did as a major. And it was a great experience for me. It was really eye-opening. I realized that it wasn't just the National Guard Bureau. There was the Army Guard Directorate and the Air Guard Directorate and the joint staff, the National Guard joint staff. Up to that, I thought it was just all the folks at Arlington, now Temple Hall. I didn't realize that there was 3 different organizations. And not only that, but you get to realize the level of input and where you can influence at the national level. But the greatest thing you provide is that reach back to your state. Hey, I was at drill like 3 months ago, and this was a problem. That's why this issue is very important to me. So I highly encourage you, if at all possible, find that time in your career or with your family when you can go up to Washington, D.C. for a couple of years, because we would really appreciate you bringing your state-level experience there. And also, it's a great learning experience for you. Reg Neal's a great example. Came up there, got to be XO to the Chief of the Guard Bureau. He saw things at the joint staff level that I think have really made him successful ever since he got past there. And we'll continue to find good things for Reg. So, all right. Okay. Any more time or? Okay. All right. Folks, thanks again. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. I greatly appreciate the time to spend with you. And once again, my hat's off. Thanks for all that you do. And good luck. And please, give us in the Pac-12, we just want to get a couple of wins. So kind of be nice to us when the SEC rolls out there. Okay.
Sir, on behalf of our Adjutant General, Major General Carden, and the National Guard Association of Georgia, we'd like to present this to you. To add to during your free time, you can have some reading and professional development. Thank you again for taking the time to come, and we really appreciate you, sir.
Hey, thanks, Reg. Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you so much. Thank you. Absolutely.